There is an unquestioned axiom at the very heart of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, a profound delusion that infects us all, the belief that the Imperium of Man actually wants to win the war. We romanticize their brutal struggle, believing that absolute peace is their ultimate goal. But today on HaqqRift, we shatter that sacred delusion. What if victory is the one thing the Imperium fears most? Today we dissect the architecture of endless war. Prepare to understand that for the High Lords of Terror, peace is not a triumph. Peace is a death sentence. To understand the darkest secret of the 41st millennium, we must first examine the horrifying, unsustainable mathematics of the imperial economy. The Imperium of Man is not a functioning society that happens to be at war. It is a monolithic, galaxy-spanning war engine that happens to contain a society. Look at the structure of a forge world or a hive world. You have entire planets, trillions of human beings, whose sole generational purpose is the mass production of artillery shells, laser guns, and promethium fuel. They do not produce art. They do not produce culture. They produce the instruments of absolute annihilation. For 10,000 years, the entire logistical framework of 1,000,000 worlds has been ruthlessly optimized for one singular outcome: the sustainment of the front lines. Now introduce the terrifying concept of peace into this equation. Imagine for a moment that the tyrannid hive fleets are defeated. Imagine the Eye of Terror closes and the Orc wargs are broken. What happens to 1 trillion workers on a forge world when the Departamento Munitorum stops ordering bolter rounds? The economy does not transition, it violently collapses. Billions would starve within a single planetary rotation. The Imperium cannot survive peace because it has entirely forgotten how to manufacture anything other than death. A machine built exclusively to grind meat will eventually turn on its own operators if the meat supply runs dry. Beyond the cold logic of economics, we must look at the fragility of imperial sociology. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 diverse worlds across the galaxy. It contains feral planets where men fight with sharpened bone, and it contains hyper-advanced spires where nobles modify their genetics with arcane technology. There is absolutely no shared culture, no shared language, and no shared standard of living between these worlds. How do you unite an empire of 1,000,000 disconnected, starving, and oppressed worlds? You cannot unite them through prosperity, because the Imperium has none to offer. You cannot unite them through a shared vision of a utopian future, because the future is a nightmare. The only political glue strong enough to bind the Imperium of Man together is absolute institutionalized xenophobia. You unite them through a shared, blinding hatred of the other, the alien, the mutant, the heretic. As long as the citizens of Terra and the feral tribes of a death world are both terrified of the same orc invasion or the same demonic incursion, they will not look at the staggering inequalities between them. The Imperium desperately needs endless, horrifying enemies, because without a monster at the gates to keep the population terrified, the citizens would immediately realize that the true monsters are the ones sitting on the planetary thrones. This brings us to the ultimate political utility of eternal war, the absolute justification of fascism. The Imperium of Man is the most violently oppressive, tyrannical regime imaginable. It demands the surrender of all individual thought. It enforces a mandatory, fanatical religion. It executes billions of innocent people on the mere suspicion of genetic deviance or ideological impurity. In any rational universe, a government this monstrous would be overthrown by its own people in a matter of days. But the High Lords of Terror hold an unbeatable philosophical trump card, the state of emergency. When the galaxy is actively trying to consume the human race, the suspension of all human rights is no longer viewed as an act of tyranny. It is viewed as an act of triage. The Inquisition does not need to justify the burning of a world. They merely point to the encroaching shadow of chaos. The Adeptus Arbites do not need to justify beating starving workers to death. They merely cite the necessity of the imperial tithe to hold back the tyrannid swarms. Endless enemies provide the Imperium with a blank check for infinite cruelty. If the external threats were ever permanently eliminated, the absolute authority of the High Lords would evaporate overnight. They need the galaxy to burn, so they can justify holding the only fire extinguisher. Because eternal war is a structural necessity, a terrifying reality emerges. If the Imperium ever runs out of enemies, it is administratively forced to invent new ones. This is the dark, breathing heart of the Inquisition. The Ordo Hereticus operates on a deeply cynical, unspoken doctrine. They do not simply hunt the corrupted, they actively cultivate an environment where corruption is inevitable, ensuring their own endless relevance. There is no such thing as innocence, only degrees of guilt. This is not just a terrifying motto, it is a declaration of intent. When a sector of space falls quiet, when the Xenos are purged and the cults are burned, the Inquisition does not rest. They tighten the definition of heresy. A political disagreement becomes treason. A deviation in a localized prayer becomes blasphemy. A worker asking for an extra ration of water becomes a subversive rebel. The Imperium is a snake eating its own tail. To maintain the constant paralyzing level of fear required to control quintillions of humans, the state will inevitably turn its crosshairs inward. The Imperial war machine is a furnace that must be fed, and if it cannot feed on aliens and demons, it will eagerly, systematically begin to feed upon its own children. We are forced to confront the ultimate, crushing irony of the Emperor's grand design. 10,000 years ago, during the Great Crusade, the Emperor of mankind unleashed war upon the galaxy with a specific, finite goal. He waged a war to end all wars. He sought to conquer the stars so that humanity could finally live in an era of enlightened, secular peace. The bolter and the chainsword were meant to be temporary tools, discarded once the galaxy was safe. But the 41st millennium is the absolute perverse inversion of that dream. The tools of survival have become the very reason for existence. War is no longer a means to an end. War is the end itself. The Imperium does not fight to achieve victory. It fights simply for the right to keep fighting tomorrow. The human race has been transformed into a biological weapon that cannot be switched off. We look at the unending slaughter, the apocalyptic crusades, and the endless meat grinder of the trenches, and we weep for the tragic necessity of it all. But the true horror is realizing that the masters of the Imperium are not weeping. They are calculating. They are managing the exact required level of galactic trauma to ensure that the golden chains around the neck of humanity are never, ever broken. When we stare into the suffocating darkness of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, we are forced to re-evaluate the nature of power. The greatest trick the Imperium of Man ever pulled was convincing its own citizens that the eternal war is a tragedy forced upon them by a cruel galaxy. We refuse to see the cold, administrative truth that the permanent state of emergency is the only mechanism keeping the Imperial Palace standing. The tragedy of the 41st millennium is not that humanity is surrounded by monsters. The tragedy is that if all the monsters were to suddenly die, the Imperium would have to instantly create new ones to prevent the human race from looking up at the Golden Throne and realizing they are locked in a cage of their own making. The war will never end because the hands holding the weapons have completely forgotten how to do anything else. If you have the courage to face the dark architecture of this universe, join the Rift, subscribe to the channel, and if you wish to treat me to a coffee to support this grimdark philosophy, you will find the PayPal link resting in the description below. Keep questioning the propaganda. The galaxy is burning. Welcome to the Rift.